Plohetski. Opening statements began today in the trial of two former Williamson County deputies and the death of Javier Ambler II. In 2019, deputies J.J. Johnson and Zach Camden chased Ambler in a pursuit that started because he failed to dim his headlights. That 22-minute chase crossed into Austin, where Ambler crashed his car. Body camera footage shows Ambler shouting that he had a heart condition and could not breathe, all while deputies used tasers on him and the show Live PD was filming. A grand jury in Austin indicted Johnson and Camden on manslaughter charges. They face up to 20 years behind bars if convicted. This trial is expected to last 2 weeks here in Austin. And joining me now are two Austin attorneys who have closely followed this case and closely followed opening statements this morning. Welcome to Rick Flores and Brad Vinson. Rick, I know you were in court this morning. We sat next to each other. What was your impression from both sides of their opening statements?
Opening statements is such a crucial part of a trial. Last week, the jurors only sat through jury selection, where they don't really know the facts of the case, and both sides, the prosecution and the defense, are really just kind of talking with them about hypotheticals and what evidence might come in and what their general feelings about law enforcement are. And today, the jurors are on the edge of their seats because they're actually hearing for the first time who the players are, what this case is about, and I thought both sides did a fantastic job.
What about you, Brad?
Very strong opening statements by both sides. The state came out with their kind of hook, which was 2 seconds to comply, 2 minutes to die. That I think they're going to shore up as they show the 2 minutes of the video and how many times he was tased. And then I think the defense came in strong by saying that they're going to be stacking up with experts, legal experts, police experts who are going to say that this was justified. And then they're going to challenge the medical examiner's report. And I think that's their technical stance on how they're going to fight this. And they came out really strong.
Opening statements, of course, is the most immediate thing that happened today. But before we actually go into sort of what was said in opening statements, I want to rewind the tape just a little bit, because there have been so many discussions and so much debate in our community about prosecution of law enforcement officers. So just based on what you saw today and heard today in opening statements, not even getting into whether or not there was a conviction or not in this case, was DA Jose Garza, was this an appropriate case in both of your estimations to bring forward, Rick?
I think it is. You know, there was mention today in court that this case was not brought forward until there was a change in the administration. But I'm not surprised that this case was brought forward. If anything, I'm a little surprised that it wasn't brought forward during the previous administration. I think it's a close case that needs to be decided by the community. I don't think this is politically driven necessarily. I think this is an appropriate case where there is an argument to both sides as to whether or not a conviction is going to be the end result.
This is why we have trials. There is evidence here that shows that a crime occurred, right? And it's up for the jury to decide whether or not that evidence meets the burden of beyond a reasonable doubt. This is absolutely an appropriate case to take before a jury.
I know that many legal experts, when I talk to you guys in other cases, a lot of attorneys will say this is the exact type of case that is won and lost by who sits on the jury, who is in the box. Rick, as you were looking at those 12 jurors today, could you make any determination just by their mere appearance as they were watching opening statements?
You know, one thing that I thought was interesting is when you and I were sitting there during opening statements, I was looking over at the jurors. And what's interesting is that the same jurors who were nodding along to the prosecution's opening statements, those same jurors, when the defense attorney got up there, the same jurors were nodding along. And I think that shows that there are good arguments to both sides and that there weren't any jurors who looked immediately closed off to either side as either side was presenting this morning. They all seem to be engaged. They all seem to be nodding along. And I think they're all receptive to some of the arguments that both sides were making this morning.
Brad, I know much has been made in recent days about the fact that there are no black members of this jury. In your experience, in a case like this, does that ultimately matter?
I mean, I think it could matter. I mean, if I wasn't there for jury selection, I don't know the 12 that are on the jury right now. I don't know what their makeup is like. I know that the panel had 300 members in the panel. So if you've whittled that down to 12, I think that both sides had a fair chance to really examine a lot of people across, our section of society to get to those 12 people, which recently there have been several challenges to veneer panels in Travis County,
Right.
and some judges who have ruled in favor of those challenges.
Busting the jury,
That's right. And I think, by Sage allowing 300 people to sit on the panel, she really tried to make sure that there's no issues with race or ethnicity or religion or sex or anything like that as far as to how the jury was picked.
In opening statements today, the defense we saw made much of Javier Ambler's decision to flee instead of pulling over. To what extent will his own actions, his own conduct play in this trial, Rick?
I think that's a large part of what the defense is. We heard the defense attorney say, not only did he refuse to dim his lights, but he refused to pull over, and then went on to say that there were about a dozen other crimes that were committed, including a high-speed chase of 110 miles per hour, hitting other vehicles, fleeing after hitting those vehicles. And so I think that's a large part of the defense team's case, is the actions, not only what happened when he got out of the car, but all of the things and all of the actions that Javier Ambler did up until it got to the point when he exited his vehicle.
How much does that matter, do you think, Brad?
I think it matters, but I think this is the escalation that we see, right, in law enforcement encounters. And, the moment that those lights came on and that Javier Ambler decided to not stop, the producers at Live PD and the officers in the car got exactly what they wanted. They got a high-risk police encounter that was going to be great for TV. And he shouldn't have done it, he shouldn't have ran, but he definitely didn't deserve to die for it, right? And that's what happens when you have police encounters. They're typically already going to be escalated, but when you have Live PD involved, we've seen it across the country just be the gasoline for the fire.
Yeah, you said that is the smoke that covers this
Right.
entire case. I mean, Rick, how inflamed might the jury be over this notion that they were just trying to make good TV?
We heard it this morning that the prosecution said that there was the shadow of Live PD right behind the officers, and that this is what was turning the temperature up, and this is what kind of fueled that fire, and that the motivation for what happened was for it to make good TV. And I think that's going to be a big part of it, and I think that's going to turn a lot of the jurors off.
Brad, you totally agree with that?
I completely agree with that. Yeah, I think if you ask the question, do you think that an officer is more or less likely to engage in high-risk encounters and escalate those encounters if he knows that he's being broadcast live to the nation? Do you think he's going to be more or less likely to be a little more dramatic?
Well, and as we know, the Texas lawmakers were so compelled by this concern about entertainment versus policing that they passed a law, the Javier Ambler
Right.
law, that bans production companies from partnering with Texas law enforcement agencies. Another issue that is really going to play a big role in this case is what you guys refer to as causation, whether or not Javier Ambler died as a result of the taser shocks, the 4 taser shocks, or whether or not his comorbidities and his overall health actually led to his death. Is that going to be a problem, Rick, for the state?
We're going to hear a lot of that during the trial. We started hearing it this morning. The prosecution is saying that the reason Javier Ambler died that night is because of the actions of those police officers. The phrase that was used by the prosecution this morning is the but-for causation, but for the actions of the 2 defendants. Whereas the defense attorney, during his presentation this morning, was arguing that, yes, that may have contributed to it, but that really the cause of death was Javier Ambler's other medical problems, pre-existing medical problems that he had, and that it wasn't necessarily due to the actions of the officers, but that it was his stature, his weight, and the other comorbidities, like you said.
The defense said he could have died going up a flight of stairs. Is that going to land,
Right.
Brad, with the jurors?
If you're the defense, as a defense lawyer, you have to argue anything that is logical, that doesn't sound too smoke and mirrors, right? Anything that's logical and sounds like the jury could find a way to a not guilty, you have to put that before the jury. And so they absolutely have to make the causation element or arguments. They're compelled to fight against that because they can't just leave it on the table. So I do think that, you could get some of the jurors to believe that maybe there's a but-for cause here, but that the greater causation was the comorbidities.
It's a fine line to walk. A little bit of what I heard this morning was the defense team essentially blaming Javier Ambler for his own death. And like Brad said, I see why they're making that argument, but I can see how that might turn off some of the jurors when they're sitting there thinking, wait a second, who are you saying is the cause of this death? And from what I heard, I can see that that's going to turn off some of the jurors.
And I think one of the most compelling, by any estimation, the most compelling piece of evidence is this video that so many people in our community and frankly across the country have seen of Javier Ambler's final moments, where he tells them 5 to 7 times, I cannot breathe, I have congestive heart failure. At one point, according to prosecutors this morning, he said, I'm dying. How compelling, Rick, is that evidence? And what do you make of this defense position of everybody says that, or maybe not everybody, but many suspects will say that to buy more time when they're being arrested?
That's going to be the key piece of this case, and that's what jurors are going to want to see. They're going to want to see that evidence themselves. They're going to want to hear what was said. There was some discrepancy as to what was said and what they're going to hear. And opening statements are exactly that. It's a preview. It's a roadmap of what you're going to hear. Essentially, what the case is going to boil down to, the prosecution said that the actions of the officers were, the 3 words they used were unjustifiable, unnecessary, and unreasonable.
Brad, how inflammatory could that video be to the jury?
So the video is going to be everything for the jury. They're going to have to see, was it 2 seconds? Did he get out of the car and put his hands up and wait for law enforcement to approach him, or was he trying to run? It sounds to me like the state's saying that he gets out of the car, puts his hands up. So the video is going to be inflammatory. And then I think it's going to match up with, there's this technical fight that we heard in openings this morning between Ken and the state, right? So the defense and the state, about how many times he was tased and what's appropriate. The state said that law enforcement experts will testify 3 times over a period of 15 seconds is reasonable, or at the maximum of what should be prescribed. And what the evidence is going to show us is that it was 4 times for 20 seconds, right? And so I think the defense is going to have to really fight the technicalities on that, but the state's probably going to have a win in that category.
Your thoughts on that, Rick?
You know, a lot of promises were made this morning about what you're going to hear, and there were some differences even in opening statements about what the evidence is going to show. And essentially, when a lawyer is standing in front of a jury during opening statements and making those promises, you better come through on that. And in a case like this, where there is video evidence, some of these lawyers end up sometimes eating their words because what they promised in opening statements isn't exactly what the evidence will show.
And that could turn into a big problem for either side, depending on how jurors receive the video,
right,
and their estimation. A total unfair question based on, opening statements and some testimony, some early testimony, but early predictions at this early stage, Rick.
I think right now I'd have to say the very strong possibility of a hung jury. I was looking over at the jury, and like I said, I saw a lot of them nodding along with both sides, and there are compelling arguments to both sides. And so I can, right now, if you made me give you an answer, I'd say hung jury, although I wouldn't be surprised either way.
I mean, being a defense lawyer, I always start that it's not guilty until the state has met their burden, right? Opening statements are not evidence. The evidence isn't in yet. So once the evidence starts coming in, things can start to change, right? Legally, that's how it should be. A jury should think about it like that, right? So right now, I would say not guilty, but I think that things could change very quickly.
Yeah, overnight's a long time
Yes.
when we're talking about these types of cases where evidence can really change things in a matter of moments even.
That's right.
Rick Flores, Brad Vinson, thank you both for your time and your expertise.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
And we'll continue to closely follow this trial in the days to come.